Hey, it's Josh Vergara from Android Authority. What's going on, everybody? And every photo and video that you're seeing in this camera feature focus was taken on the cameras of the HTC 10. Now, throughout this video, you are going to be seeing some selfie video shots just to demonstrate the optical image stabilization that's built into the front-facing camera. Now, that's a first for the HTC line and a first for pretty much any front-facing camera. So you can judge for yourself if the optical image stabilization is actually doing the trick. But the other thing that you'll notice is that I am recording on the front-facing camera at full HD resolution, but it is also recording high-res audio, so you can also see what that would sound like for little vlog-type videos like this. And while we're on the subject of having 24-bit audio, which also works on the rear-facing camera, here you can listen to some sounds of nature. We'll take a look at the extra features of the camera app first. First, add panorama, as you can see here, which is stitched together pretty well without too much fuss. And then there is also a hyperlapse mode that allows for a very long video to be sped up and stabilized within the app itself. There are also Zoe captures, so if you do have the Zoe camera on as your mode, it will take quick 3-second videos on top of the photo that you're already taking just for some nice effects. HDR on the HTC 10 camera does seem to do a pretty good job, especially in the right situations. But in most bright situations, the main thing it will do is bring down the highlights. It will bring up the shadows a little bit, but where it really does fall short is adding in that color, where we do think that there is some missing in the HTC 10's overall processing of these photos. The speed of the camera has also been quite nice, so it's not too hard to get a quick shot off when you really need to. You just have to swipe twice down on the turned off screen, it will go straight into the camera, and you should be able to get your picture pretty quickly. But now we can get into our general testing, and this is where you will find a lot of 100 crops, so we can take a look at the detail inside of all of these photos. Now, the HTC 10 comes with a 12 ultra pixel camera, as HTC still calls them, which are used for larger pixels for better low light shots, but the smaller amount of pixels also counts for what could be a lowered amount of detail, and that is what we saw in the Samsung Galaxy S7, which took a similar approach. But as you can see in these bright daylight shots, there is a pretty good amount of detail until you do crop in, which again is not going to be an ideal thing to do for photos that have less than, let's say, 16 megapixels like we saw last year. But overall, you do have a lot of detail in these photos until you crop in, and in certain areas of these photos, like in the Ferrari grille, as you can see right here, it does seem just that little bit smudged out and has a little bit more noise than we would like.
I would say 5 months, 6 months.
But if a decrease in sharpness was to be expected somewhat, what we wanted to highlight in this section was an inconsistency when it came to the color. Now with the HTC 10, you can get some pretty great shots like this one where there's a high amount of contrast and also a pretty good saturation in these flowers, but in plenty of other situations, the HTC 10 can get overwhelmed by the highlights of a scene, making them really blown out and kind of skewing the look of a picture. And even then, it will go for a warmer color temperature while also lowering the saturation of the overall photo. Now that's not to say that any of these photos look really dull, it's just that they don't seem to have the kind of saturation that we've seen in other flagship phones. Hi boy, hi! Whoa! That's awesome, man. As is customary in a video like this, I will bring you guys a lot of foodie pictures, and that is what you're getting in this section. So those of you who are Instagram foodies can see what the HTC 10 will be like if you want to take a picture of the dish that's right in front of you. Now, we did already mention the decrease in sharpness across a number of photos, but it's really not all that bad. What we think is worse is the inconsistent color processing. So when it comes to some of these dishes, you might not get the vibrancy that you would really like. That said, however, the decrease in the saturation does tend to happen more in low light shots, which will be coming up just after this section. And to round out this video, we will take a look at the low light shots. And the main issue in a number of these photos, as you can see in this one, is that the highlights are getting really blown out. They almost look like flares in the background, making for a very inconsistent scene. The other thing you'll probably notice here is that in lower light situations, much like a number of other smartphone cameras, it tends to go for a much warmer temperature in the color temperature, and coupled with the lower saturation that the HTC 10 is already kind of guilty of, that makes for a photo that kind of lacks that bit of punch that we would really like it to have. Overall, the HTC 10 camera is one of the best that they've put out in quite a while, and it suffers from pretty much the same pitfalls that any other smartphone suffers from. However, HTC still has a problem with processing, and in a number of photos, there's still a lack of saturation, and overall, it's just a little bit softer when compared to other flagships in the same segment. We will give credit where credit is due. The HTC 10 does an above average job in recording audio no matter which camera you're using, which makes it an ideal candidate for vlogging type videos or even just selfie videos, especially with that OIS that is in the front facing camera. Even if the OIS can't necessarily compensate for too much because of how small the unit is, it does add just that little bit to make front facing camera shooting that much more enjoyable. And so there you have it for this camera feature focus on the HTC 10. I wanted to make sure I got a lot of photos, videos, and I wanted to make sure that you guys heard the high-res audio that you can get no matter which camera you're using on this phone. The HTC 10 might not be the best camera that's out there in the flagship market, but we do think you can do a lot worse. So taking the philosophy of the best camera you have is the one that's on you, you can certainly do a lot worse than the HTC 10, and we do think it's a pretty good candidate for a daily shooter. Keep it tuned to Android Authority for even more on the HTC 10, including all of our coverage, and you can keep it tuned here by subscribing to our channel if you haven't already, and don't forget to drop us some likes here. After that, you can head on over to AndroidAuthority.com for even more, because we are your source for all things Android.